I want to thank you all for coming out, especially on such a cold night, to help participate in our first public budget engagement forum. Thank you all. The mayor has tasked us with taking your feedback into account before next year's budget is finalized. And this is a fresh start to how the budget process has worked in the past. The mayor has talked a lot about her priorities in recent weeks, and tonight we get to hear some of yours. But first, let's hear from the mayor. Tonight, I'd like to introduce to you Mayor Bowser.
Well, good evening again, everybody, and welcome to our first budget engagement forum. It is the first of three. We'll be at Anacostia on Saturday and at Dunbar on Monday. And in these budget engagement forums, we really wanted to hear directly from you what's important to you as I, with my team, shape the budget that I will deliver to the council on April the 4th. And like every mayor in the history of mayors, when I took the oath of office on January the 2nd, I inherited the successes of my predecessors. I also inherited some things that they left undone, and I inherited a $250 million budget deficit for next year, and that begins on October 2016. For this year, in 2015, there's also a budget shortfall, which we've been working very carefully with our team, with the Council of the District of Columbia, that represents about an $80 million shortfall, which we've been working very carefully together to manage for this fiscal year. So we are really here to hear your choices, your priorities, your aspirations for our city, but also I want you to help us think through the tough choices and big decisions that lay ahead. So it may seem like a big challenge to tackle discussing and prioritizing our $10 billion budget in the next 90 minutes or so, but that's exactly what we came here to do today. When I got into office, one of the first things that I did was meet with our chief financial officer, who is very focused, like we all are, on the fiscal health of the District of Columbia, how we continue to grow and how we continue to make the investments that are going to make our city the kind of city that we want to continue to live in. Now, all of us are budget makers. I'm going to make a budget for our city, and you make a budget every day, every month, annually for your own household. And in your own budget, you make decisions. For example, you'll decide, like many people woke up this morning and their car wouldn't turn over. And they started thinking about how they're going to have to invest in a vehicle, and then how they're going to pay for it, if they're going to make a loan or if they're going to save to make those types of investments. Other people are thinking about how they're going to pay rent or buy a new house or pay college tuition or work themselves into a better situation and into our middle class. And they too are making decisions every day about their expenses. Some people have had the unfortunate circumstance of losing a job or losing other income, but still having the same amount of expenses and trying to figure out how to make ends meet in that way. So just like families do all across our city, what we're doing over the next several weeks is looking at those decisions. So we have a certain level of expenditures that have been planned, and we have a certain level of revenues that are coming in. It's just that they're less than we thought they would be last year at this time. So you've heard me say over the course of 20 months that I am a practical legislator when I was a legislator, and I am going to be the same kind of steady mayor, not pie in the sky, not over-promising, but telling you the truth as soon as I know it and as I see it, and asking you to be at the table as we make the budget, as we prioritize policies, as we hire a world-class team, and as we implement the vision that we've shaped together. So as I see it, you will have a number of themes that permeate our discussion, and themes that will be reflected, I believe, in the final budget that we create. Housing is, of course, top on the list. In every, yep, you can clap for that. In every neighborhood across this city, from Ward 3 to Ward 8, and every ward in between, people are concerned about the cost of living in the District of Columbia. Now, we have worked hard together to build a city that's moving in the right direction in so many ways. And that progress has also created a lot of pressures on housing prices. So we're going to talk about housing. No matter where I go in this city, people are extremely concerned about those who are less fortunate and find themselves homeless, people who are in shelter or unsheltered on our streets. And people have told me to make solving the problem of homelessness a top priority. Now, you know, I was a ward council member, an ANC commissioner before that, and spent my professional life before that making sure that we, the government, could support revitalizing neighborhoods. And I'll be a neighborhoods mayor too. Some of you are sitting at tables that say neighborhoods, and how do we invest in neighborhoods to make sure that they are the high quality places that we want to live? People choose to live in the District of Columbia because they want to be proud when they open the door that the sidewalks is, suitable, that the trees aren't falling down, that the schools have been invested in, that we have high-quality parks, and that our streets are safe. And all of those things are the reason why so many people are deciding to move right here in the district. Now, the infrastructure investments are important too. Part of an indicator of the fiscal health of a city is if that city is investing in the roads, in the sidewalks, in public transportation, in water and sewer, in electric, in police buildings, in fire stations, in libraries, and recreation centers. Now, we have experienced over the last, certainly the time that I've been on the council, and even before that, significant investments in our public infrastructure, like our beautiful Woodrow Wilson High School. You can clap for that. And there's more we have to do in the way of our public high schools and middle schools. And you should expect that our budget, and I hope our discussion today will say how exactly we're going to do that. We also have to be committed to our whole city. And we're having these forums in 3 places in our city, and I imagine that today there are people from all 8 wards here tonight to talk about our priorities. And one of the things, and I get the opportunity to swear in ANC commissioners, and I've had the great privilege of taking the oath of office myself now many times. And the part about the oath that I always pause on is that I will do my best for the District of Columbia as a whole. So sometimes we have to not be as focused on our own parochial interests, but recognize that the investments that we make across town in somebody else's neighborhoods really does help our entire city. Will you be with me with that discussion? And finally, I'll say that a big section of what we'll talk about today is, and I know that because I hear it from you all the time in emails and calls and text, is making sure that our city is safe, that we're protecting our homeland security issues, that we're protecting our street and just neighborhood safety issues, that when we call on 911 or 311 that we're getting an adequate response, and making sure that we are the safest city possible. And I'm committed to hearing from you about your priorities around our safety. So I am so pleased pleased on a night as cold as this that so many people have come out to talk. And now what you'll hear is from the people on my team that's really going to spend the next several weeks drilling down on what the feedback that you give us tonight and the input that we get from other stakeholders. But before I acknowledge members of the Bowser administration, I want to acknowledge the council members who are here as well. And I see the Ward 3 council member, Mary Che, who is here. Give her a round of applause. And I also see at-large council member Vincent Orange, who's here, and give him a round of applause. Today you will hear from my budget director. You already heard from the deputy budget director, Jenny Reed. But I now want to introduce to you, I said in the 20 months that we were out campaigning that I wanted to hire a professional public manager to help me run the city. I had no idea, and I was willing to go all around the country, look all through our government to do it. And I was able to go right across the river to the city of Alexandria, and I was so happy that we were able to recruit Rashad Young here. I've really never met a person more excited by public administration. And you're going to be excited to meet him and hear from him too. One thing that we changed in our administration was where the budget sits. In the previous administration, the budget director sat outside of the office of the city administrator. And I never thought that was the best setup, because really to help manage the city, you have to have a full knowledge of where the money is going. And that's why I've tasked Rashad with the responsibility of developing the budget. Ladies and gentlemen, your city administrator, Rashad Young.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and good evening to all of you. This is such a great turnout. I'm so pleased that you braved the cold to be here with us tonight. As you've heard from the mayor, we're here tonight to have an engaged conversation about where our taxpayer dollars should be spent and, quite frankly, where they should not be spent. I want to talk to you a little bit about where our current dollars are being spent, a little bit of a budget 101, if you will. In the current budget year, which we're nearly halfway through, the Bowser administration inherited a $7.7 billion spending plan for our local taxpayer dollars. The rest of the $10 billion that you'll hear about is really federal dollars that we don't have a lot of control over. Our budget has two parts. We pay for our programs and our people in what we call the operating budget. The second part of that is the capital budget, which we use to pay for things like recreation centers, libraries, roads, and bridges. So I want to talk a little bit about where our operating dollars go. About 10% of what we spend goes to government direction and support. That's about $733 million. 5% to economic development and regulation. That translates to about $374 million. 14% to public safety at $1 billion. 26% in education at $1.9 billion. And then health and human services is another 26% at $1.9 billion. 8% in public works spending, that's $626 million, and 11% for our financing obligations for the debt that we issue for capital and infrastructure expenses, and that's $787 million. For capital, we spend about 4% or $55.4 million in government direction and support, $71 million in economic development, and about $47 million for public safety and $500 million for education, and about $1 billion for health and human services and public works and transportation. So you heard the mayor talk about the priority areas that we're focused on and that she's focused on, and you are grouped tonight according to those priority areas, and are going to have some conversations about that. And I want to give you a brief snapshot of some of the major program costs in those areas. And so this is the kinds of priority areas or topics or investments that we spend in the government that relate to the tables that you're in. So for those of you who are at the education table, and we'll be talking about that, we spend about $1.3 billion to provide education services to 87,000 school children, both DCPS and charter students, about $7.6 million for early childhood education, $26 million for wraparound services for children with special needs, and about $29 million for programs at our 26 libraries. When we talk about economic opportunity, there's about $43 million that we spend for job training, $34 million for unemployment insurance and enforcing fair labor practices, about $3 million for startups so that they can have access to capital, $60 million for job training assistance and TANF for families, $111 million for shelter and services for homeless neighbors, and about $750 million for health care coverage for DC residents. In the priority area of improving neighborhoods, and again, this is a snapshot of what we spend. We're trying to give you a sense of sort of the large areas of investment. For improving neighborhoods, $11 million for our streetscape and facade improvements along our main streets, $46 million towards affordable housing rents and vouchers, $36 million towards construction and business inspection, licensing and permitting, $8 million for public arts, $30 million for programming at our rec centers across the city, and $17 million for the maintenance of those facilities across the city. In public safety, our spend is $345 million to keep 4,000 police officers on duty, $78 million for the DC jail, $25 million to handle 911 and 311 calls, and about $7 million to maintain our 33 fire stations. In the last category of improving our infrastructure and the environment, $50 million on road and bridge maintenance and repairs, about $30 million for energy efficiency and renewable energy programs, $4 million for safety and emissions, about $26 million for protecting our waterways, and $300 million for the metro system and Metro Bus. So that just gives you some sense of where we're investing resources in some of the broad categories. So as you talk at your tables around education, public safety, and infrastructure, you can reflect on and talk about your priority for those kinds of investments in those program areas, where you think we can make trade-offs or reductions, or where you think we need to make additional investments. We have a number of city staff here that are a part of the Bowser administration. Our deputy mayor's on hand tonight, and they're going to be joining the conversations at these tables and can answer questions about our current program budgets. So I want to take a quick moment and introduce them and just have them raise their hand. Kevin Donahue, who is the deputy city administrator, is here. Kevin, if you will raise your hand, he's right back here. He's responsible for the public safety and government operations clusters. Brian Kenner is our deputy mayor for planning and economic development. Brian, where are you in the room? Brian, I don't see Brian in the room at this point. His cluster includes Department of Employment Services, Small Business, and the Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs. Jenny Niles, our Deputy Mayor for Education, her cluster includes public schools, the Office of State Superintendent in Education, and our higher education institutions. Jenny is over here to my right. And then Brenda Donald, who is our Deputy Mayor for Health and Human Services, she's back here at this table, includes areas like Child and Family Services, Human Services, and the Department of Parks and Recreation. So with that, let me introduce Matt Brown, our Budget Director. He and his team are working hard to address the budget gap that we are facing, and Matt will talk a little bit about that.
Thanks, City Administrator. He mentioned that we've got a team of people who are working hard to solve the budget gap. Tonight's about you. Tonight's about you helping us do that. We need to deliver a balanced budget to the council on April 2nd. It's not only the right thing to do to balance our expenditures and revenues, but it's the law. So we want to do the right thing, and we obviously want to obey the law. The mayor talked about the $250 million budget gap. It's obviously a big number that we're working with, but that's what the Office of the Chief Financial Officer projects as a gap. But for fiscal year 16. And that's something that the Chief Financial Officer does every year. They take a look at how much revenue is going to come in, and on the other side, how much are all those programs that the city delivers going to cost? And they compare the two, and when they're out of balance, you have a gap. And it's not so much unlike your household budget. The mayor talked a little bit about personal finances. Every year, when you're balancing your household budget, you know how much income is going to come in, and you know that the cost of goods increases, your grocery bill gets a little bit higher, cost of summer camp, that trip you want to take, And when they don't balance, you have to start prioritizing. And that's what we're here to do tonight at the various tables, is to really look at each of those program areas and decide what's the most important thing that we need to do, and how do we make those things balance. Some may ask some questions about why the revenues are not growing as quickly. And let me be clear, revenues are growing. They're just not growing as quickly as was anticipated when the Chief Financial Officer did a previous projection. It's really income taxes, automated traffic enforcement revenues. But at the end of the day, it's a gap, and we've got to solve that. So back to balancing the budget. You've heard a lot of numbers tonight. The number I'm going to talk about is the $250 million. And just for perspective, for fire and emergency medical services, we spend about $200 million on that citywide. So $200 million for fire and emergency medical services, all of those services that are delivered, and our gap is about $250 million. Public libraries, we spend about $57 million. We'd have to, we're not obviously not suggesting any of these cuts, but it would be 4 times the library budget just to solve the budget gap. Public schools, Rashad mentioned, the city administrator mentioned the entire budget for schools. Just the amount that we spend on DCPS is $710 million. Again, about a third, the gap is about a third of the entire budget for DCPS. So I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank you in advance for the work the work you're going to do here tonight. Jenny Reed, who you heard from earlier, is going to give us the game plan, tell us how to work through the evening. So Jenny. Thank you.
All right, good evening again. So now we are going to break into our small groups to have our discussions about priorities, and we're really excited to get your input here. So tonight at each table you have a facilitator. Facilitator, can you please raise your hands? Okay, we'll make sure to get you one right there. You also have a note taker at each table. Note takers, can you please raise your hands as well? These folks are here to help make sure that your ideas are recorded and shared. And we're going to make sure that we record and share those ideas with the mayor and the leadership team that you've heard from tonight. We're also going to post a public summary of what we heard of for everyone to see. But keep in mind, this isn't your only chance to give feedback. We have 2 more engagement forums, and we're also going to have a website, budget.dc.gov. I'll say it one more time, budget.dc.gov, that will continue to take your responses. If you have urgent questions tonight that pertain to the discussion, your facilitators and note takers know to raise a card. We're going to come around, collect that question, and we'll get you an answer as fast as we can. Also, if you have questions that aren't necessarily pertain to the discussion but are urgent, we're going to write those down, put them in a parking lot, and make sure we follow back up with you to get you an answer. Tonight, you're here to discuss 2 key areas: your priorities for the budget and ways to close the gap. The first part of your discussion is going to be on priorities. We're going to ask you to name 2 to 3 new ideas that you want us to do. We're also going to have you name 2 to 3 things that you don't want us to cut in the budget, things that you want us to make sure that we keep. Then we're going to switch to gap closing. We're going to have 2 key sections here. So you've now just spent about 20 minutes talking about priorities, and you also heard from Matt that we unfortunately have a budget gap that we need to close. So we need your ideas on where can we cut back on spending. Maybe there are areas of the budget that aren't a big priority for you or that you don't think are working well. We want to know those. And then on the other side, there's the potential to raise revenues. We want to hear from you if that's something you're interested in. So now I'm going to turn it over. We're going to spend the first part of the discussion on priorities. I'll give you the key signal when to flip to gap closing. And with that, please begin.
Go to this alternative school and be learning, but in this other environment.
Yes.
And then that when they're ready to go back to their home school, then they can go. So it's similar to what you're saying.
Right. Yes.
And so I guess what I'm doing is supporting what you're saying and sort of adding another spin to it.
Education is an equalizer. For education, people can achieve it. People can move forward. So I am an educator at heart. So I believe that education is not, reducing spending in education is not a solution for a city like this.
realize the value of athletics in terms of increasing student performance. And I do have a number of ideas that I would like to talk to the mayor about in terms of how you utilize your athletic programs and when you engage all of the students.
Even like in the 14th Street corridor, a lot of the hospitality industry. We have a lot of large hotels, the Marriott Marquis, which provide job training. And I would like to see DOES do more of outreach to like old or new residents, letting them know that these programs are available. Because a lot of people don't.
So I think when you ask a question, what should we keep? I think we should support charter schools. I think we should support adult education. And not only adult education, but education as a whole, and all of the different aspects of education. Because right now the city has shown the world that after being the worst schools in the country now, we are some of the best. And we need to continue on that path. And so, my recommendation is that we really continue investing in the city in that particular area.
And I do see a change, but I don't see it across the board in all regions. When I speak to certain people that live in the higher number wards, they still are afflicted with the things that I saw when I first came versus I live in Ward 4, where there's some changes, but it's still only in certain pockets. So
All right, everyone, sorry to interrupt, but I'm giving you your 1-minute warning to wrap up your gap closing discussion.
And the district is unique because we are one of the only places in the country that has access to quality public adult education. We have public dollars for that. So RIA is a charter school that marries all of these needs. They're not the only answer, but I think that that's a very effective growing model for people to look at, where you see adults getting educated, access to healthcare, access to wraparound services, and the children getting schooling as well.
We want to thank you all very, very much for coming out tonight. If you haven't done so, please go ahead and just jot down any last-minute thoughts. You do have an evaluation form at your table, and we ask if you would just take a minute to fill that out. You'll help us improve the process for next year, because we're going to keep engaging you. And then lastly, I just want to share with you a couple of key themes that we've been hearing from the tables tonight in terms of where we're hearing from you want to make investments. So tonight we're hearing from you guys about affordable housing. We're hearing about job training, especially for returning citizens. We're hearing about more community engagement from our police officers. We're hearing about investments in public transit. And we're hearing lots of interesting ways from you guys about how to close the gap. So with that, I'm going to close it out and turn it over to Mayor Bowser for some final remarks. Thank you. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I heard some good ideas, and I hope that we can get some volunteers out there to shout out what were some of the top priorities from your table. Then I'm going to ask the question of what we can't touch, and then I'm going to ask for the top ideas around gap closing. Who wants to give me the #1 priority? Let me start at this table, Jenny Niles' table.
#1 priority from this table?
Yep.
Adult education.
Adult education. All right. Who wants to give me another priority? I got a gentleman here in the hat.
Affordable housing.
Affordable housing. All right, this table here. Tax abatements for home purchasing. Okay, I got it. This gentleman right here.
Mentoring within government.
Come again?
Mentoring within government.
Mentoring within government. I love it. That young lady right there with her hand up. More police in the community. That's a priority. A priority here. More funding for MPD. Yes, youth mayor. Year-round, give that man a hand. Year-round youth employment. Yes, ma'am. Funding for senior services. Give that lady a hand. Yes, ma'am. Okay, preserving condominium communities. And then I have the littlest one is going to get the last priority, and then we're going to go to the items that you don't want us to touch. Yes, sir. To make Ward 8 more safe. To make Ward 8 more safe for children. Thank you, dear. Now, did you discuss at your table, given that we have a $240 million deficit, and we will have to make some priorities and put some things at the top. So given that, what are the things that you don't want us to touch? Yes, ma'am.
Please don't touch the program that allows district residents to pay in-state tuition at other colleges.
Okay, the TAG program, and luckily the federal government helps us with that, but the TAG program, yes, is that the professor? Yes.
Budgeting for low-income residents.
Say again?
Budgeting for low-income residents.
What for low-income residents? Budgeting for low-income residents. Yes, I have a comment here. Don't touch list. Don't touch public libraries. Don't touch list. Don't touch the budget for OLA. Reestablish. Okay, so that was a priority. All right, then don't touch list. I'll take two more don't touches. 2 hands right there. Yes, ma'am. Don't touch the arts. Okay, don't touch list. Don't touch $100 million for the Housing Production Trust Fund. All right, last don't touch list.
Adult education and workforce development.
Don't touch adult education and workforce development. Okay, now here's the tough ones. Remember I told you about the gap? And remember you have some priorities? And so in order for the priorities to rise to the top and some of them to be enhanced, like $100 million for the Housing Production Trust Fund, we also have to have some ideas of where we can trim expenses. So this is the gap closing list. Now don't all speak at once. All right, yes, sir.
Centralize the siloed technology in the district.
Centralize our IT services in the District of Columbia. Got it. Yes, ma'am. Okay, so less money on incarceration, more money on prevention. Yes.
Less money on the streetcar on 8th Street.
Okay, so gap closing, streetcar on 8th Street. Mr. Schwartzman, I'm gonna come back to you, yes. Okay, less money for the soccer stadium. Yes, sir.
Say again, real estate tax. Give that to me again, sir.
That was a gap closing in the form of collecting more revenue and real estate taxes if it goes towards housing. Okay? And I'll take 3 more gap closings, and then we're going to get to work summarizing all of the information we got from the tables in your recommendations, which are going to be super helpful. So this gentleman, Professor Schwartzman, and then the last hand right there. Yes, sir.
Save money on healthcare and jails by taking care of the homeless.
Save money on?
In jails and healthcare by taking care of the homeless.
Okay, so if we address our homeless situation, we'll save money on jails and healthcare costs. It's a good point. Professor?
We can generate sizable revenue by raising the top income tax rates on the wealthy folks who are now paying a lower rate than all but the poorest residents. And this, we do not have a progressive tax structure. We need to make it progressive and also curb all these tax abatements given to corporate sector with no transparency.
Okay, so 2 ideas for gap closing is to raise taxes on the highest earning bracket and to eliminate tax abatements for corporations. Okay, last one. Come again? Victimless crime. I got it. Save money, save police resources by not making arrests for victimless crimes. That will be on the local side. So I think that you all have taken this budget engagement very seriously. We heard some fantastic priorities. I think you've also outlined some key areas that we should avoid when looking for savings. And you identified some ways, efficiencies where we could save money. Others have identified other ways to get revenues. And this is a very important discussion. I'm so pleased that I see neighbors from all 8 wards of the District of Columbia. Give yourselves a round of applause. If you have a burning idea, budget.dc.gov, budget.dc.gov. And can we all give our host at the Woodrow Wilson Senior High School a big round of applause? Thank you to all the staff at Wilson High School and to all of the wonderful students who greeted us this evening. And I look forward to seeing you out in the city. Have a good one.